with regard to Mr. O'Keefe, your neighbor who lived at the top of the street when you lived at Seven Meadows, you ever threaten him?
Never.
Did he ever threaten you?
Never.
Do you ever have any sort of back and forth exchange similar to what was up on the screen?
Never.
Hey everybody, welcome back to Truth Revealed. I'm your host, Sergio Denaro. I'm a former human intelligence collector with the Department of Defense, and today we are continuing our deep dive look into the Karen Read murder trial. So it was a hung jury, the verdict was a mistrial. Now this emphasizes the importance of having these skills and to be able to investigate and analyze and come up with the truth on our own, because there are going to be times when the judicial system just doesn't give us the answers that we're looking for. I've been analyzing the statements of the primary witnesses up to this point, Jen McCabe, Brian Higgins, and Brian Albert, but I'm going to go back and redo them individually because it warrants this level of investigation now. Today we're going to look at Colin Albert. Colin comes across as a punk kid on the stand who's arrogant, cocky, and he seems like the type of person who's just willing to lie as if there's no consequences. That's very interesting for us to look at because there are different types of people that end up on the witness stand. There are extremely intelligent, well-educated individuals, which are the types of people that most people think they are really good liars because they think about what they say. And the truth is, those are the easiest people to determine if and when they're lying. Colin Albert gets up there and he's not the sharpest tool in the shed. His answers are very short and very cocky. So he comes across as if he's giving no information. However, we are going to be able to extract a ton of information from his statement. If you've watched my previous videos, this one might look a little different. We have to focus on certain areas as opposed to other areas. There are a lot of different tools in my tool belt, and depending on the witness or the person whose statement we're analyzing, I have to use different tools. We are going to be looking very heavily at finding his deception tags, which means slightly different versions of saying the same thing over and over again. In this testimony, uncontracted denials and the word never are going to come into play.
All right, so let's jump in here. We've got Colin Albert on the stand. So let's get that baseline. Let's see what Colin Albert looks like when he's talking. I mean, he looks deceptive.
Yes.
Tell me when.
Want to say a month ago about.
What did you talk about?
I got prepped for this.
Tell me what that means. What does it mean to prep for this?
What I'm going to be getting asked.
Like when he's talking. I mean, he looks deceptive when he's talking. But let's look at the transcript and see what his verbiage tells us about truth versus deception. So who did you speak to in order to prepare to testify yesterday? Colin says, my lawyer. Other than your lawyer, who did you speak to prepare for your testimony yesterday? He says, no one. You speak to your parents? No. You speak to your mom, your dad? He says, nope. Now, nope is technically different than no. I highlighted it. Originally, I highlighted it in yellow. Because it's slightly different, we want to notate that so that if we start to see a pattern later on, we can come back up here and implement that pattern from the beginning. Did you discuss?
Your lawyer, who did you speak to prepare for your testimony yesterday?
No one.
You didn't speak to your parents?
No.
You didn't speak to your mom, your dad?
Nope.
Beginning. Did you discuss with your parents their testimony? No. Did you talk to Mr. Lawley at any point before yesterday in preparation for your testimony? Says yes. So in this beginning part, it really feels, his tone, it really feels like he's just being deceptive about everything. Technically, he's not being deceptive about everything. So tell me when. He says, I want to say a month ago. I highlighted I want to say because when people say I want to say, often it means if it were true, what I would want to say is this, but it's not true. So they'll put that little phrase in the beginning in order to tell a lie. So he says, tell me when. And he says, I want to say a month ago. Now I highlighted this so we pay attention to it, but this is an irrelevant question. Everybody knows the answer to this. He knows exactly when it was. So it doesn't look like he's using this as a deception tag here. What did you talk about? Colin says, I got prepped for this. What does it mean to prep for this? He says, what I'm going to be getting asked. Hey, these are truthful statements. The truthful stuff is in green here. He did get prepped for it, and that is what the prep consisted of. Okay, remember my first question? Very first question this morning. I said, have you spoken to anybody in order to prepare for your testimony? And you said no. And he says, yeah. So that's not true. So you spoke to Mr. Lawley. He says, okay. Now, again, he comes across like an arrogant punk, but it is possible that when he got asked the question, he was assuming that he meant anybody other than the person he was supposed to be preparing with. So I'm going to highlight this in green. We're going to give him the benefit of the doubt unless there's an indicator of deception verbally here, and as opposed to linguistically. So it's not an okay, it's a yes or no. And he says yes. So this could be confusion. And let's call a spade a spade. Colin Albert is not the brightest witness that I've looked at. But in a situation like this, the verbiage isn't deceptive. He says, you said no. And he says, yeah. And so you spoke to Mr. Lawley. He says, okay. That's the reason why I thought maybe he just didn't realize that he meant someone other than his lawyer. So tell me what you and Mr. Lawley discussed. The questions that I would be asked here. That's pretty direct. Did he go over the questions that he believed he would ask? And then Colin says, I believe so. Now, I believe is a slight reduction in commitment. So it's saying I could be wrong. But when somebody says, I believe, it generally means that they think that they're being truthful. So they should, in order to use that correctly, there should be a large quantity of something that you're looking at, and you're looking at something specific, and you're not 100% sure if it applies to everything. In this circumstance, did he go over the questions that he believed he would ask? Colin says, I believe so, because he went over a lot of questions. There is a large pool of stuff that they went over, most likely. So if he remembers one or two questions that seem like if it's in that category, this would be an honest answer. And that's why you get, I believe, as opposed to just the simple yes. I believe so is not necessarily an indicator of deception, unless somebody likes to use it that way. Then it becomes a deception tag. Then we notice that and we mark it as such. Did you give him answers to those questions that you believed you would give in response to his questions? And he says, yes. What questions did he tell you he's going to ask? And Colin says, I don't remember. Now, remember in the last video, I said, I don't remember is not the same as I can't remember. If somebody sits there and searches their memory, like when you search something on your computer, you let it run for a minute and then it comes back, no items found. That no items found is when a person says, I can't remember. However, he says, I don't remember. I don't remember is often an indicator of deception because it's showing that he's not willing to think about it. In this case, what questions did he tell you he's going to ask? Now, for all of you who have taken a test at any point in your life, high school, college, doesn't matter. As soon as you walk out of the test and somebody asks you what questions were on the test, often I can remember maybe one, but for some reason I just can't remember all of the questions. So I try and use my personal experience as I'm looking at this and to see if what I'm seeing is reasonable. What questions did he tell you he's going to ask? And he says, I don't remember. Now, there's an element of truth and I believe an element of deception to this I don't remember, because it means he's not willing to think about it. And there probably are some specific questions that he could have remembered if he would have tried, but he doesn't try. He just says, I don't remember. And that comes from that arrogant, cocky attitude where he wants to show that he's in charge. If any of his buddies are watching this testimony, he wants to come across as a tough guy. We want to keep that in mind. What answers did you tell him you were going to give? I don't remember. So in this case, I don't remember literally means exactly what it means, which is that he's not willing to think about it. And if he doesn't think about it, nothing's going to jump to the top of his head. That was just a month ago, right? Yes. Obviously, you've been thinking about this case quite a bit, haven't you? And he says, yeah. Up to this point, other than this, I don't remember. And can you be more detailed? He says, I don't remember everything he said. I think I skipped that one. After, tell me what you and Mr. Lawley discussed, questions I would be asked here. And then he says, can you be more detailed? He says, I don't remember everything he said. The truth here is that he does remember something that he said, but he doesn't want to say it. So he says, I don't remember, which again is an indicator of deception through omission. It means that you're not willing to come up with the answer that they just asked for. Can you be more detailed? I don't remember everything he said. So did he go over the questions that he believed he would ask? And he says, I believe so. And it's a truthful response. Over the last 2.5 years, he says, no. Now this is odd because that's an irrelevant question. What I wrote here is an irrelevant question that prompted an obvious lie. The question now is, why does he feel that he should lie about that? And what caused him to feel that way? That's the question that we have to ask ourselves. Because again, this is an irrelevant question. Everyone on earth knows that the answer to this question is yes. But for some reason, he thought that it was okay to just say no to this irrelevant question. So again, let's look at that question. Over the last 2.5 years, have you been thinking about this case over the last 2.5 years? Obviously, there's nobody that could be in his situation that doesn't think about this every day. Even if he doesn't want to, the people around him are going to be talking about it. So he has been thinking about that. So now we want to figure out, why did he say no? How long have you been thinking about this case? That's a good follow-up question. If somebody says, I haven't been thinking about it for the whole time. He says, since people started writing about me on the internet. Okay, now that gives us some insight here. He has rehearsed for this question. Now, this is a playing the victim statement that Jennifer McCabe pushed really hard. In her testimony, she played the victim a lot about, how their lives have been destroyed because of this. And now you're starting to see that here in Colin's statements. So this tells me that it's likely that the group rehearsed together with Colin Albert present. He's also been following the case on social media. He tells you that here. He says, since people started writing about me on the internet. That tells us that he is looking at the internet. Okay, we don't want to forget that. And then he uses the word since here twice. And this should be highlighted because since or so are our explanatory statements. We have since people started is missing time. That's a missing time statement. That means that there's a chunk of something that's relevant here. It could be part of the crime. It's something that's sensitive to him that he skipped over in order to get to this part. That tells us that he has been paying attention to this case since the beginning. But for some reason, he decided to use this as an opportunity to say that he started watching the case from this point here because of following the internet. So this tells us that he's been following the case on the internet since the beginning. Now, this also indicates an area of sensitivity for him when he began to get pulled into this personally. In his mind, I don't think he actually sees this as a direct lie. I think he sees this as a chance to get his story out there, that he's a victim here. And part of the importance of getting that story out is because this was rehearsed with his group. And so we have an explanation for a direct lie here with the no. And then we know that this is a very sensitive statement for him. And that sensitivity here most likely comes from the fact that he was prepped for this, because based on his demeanor, I would expect him on this question here to be like, yeah, I've been following it since the beginning. He hasn't had any problem answering all the irrelevant questions, honestly. And so the hesitation here comes from the fact that he wouldn't have started here. And then he cuts out everything that was pertinent to him up to that point. And then he says, writing about me on the internet. And then he gets his chance to discuss a little bit later on here why it's been so hard for him. Okay, how about since you were at a house where an individual ended up dead on the front lawn the next morning? Did that prompt you to start thinking about this case? So remember, the line of questioning here is, when did you start thinking about this case? And now, because he's already said no, here, he just doubles down and says no. This is a baseline control for us. So it's an irrelevant question, but we know that he can lie using one-word answers. Now, when he says no, we don't know if that's the truth or not. If somebody, through the first 3/4 of their statement, fully uses yes, honestly, and no, honestly, then we can pretty much be sure that they have a hard time lying directly. Colin Albert does not, but it doesn't mean that he's going to give long, eloquent lies. It means that when he lies, his lies are short. Colin is sticking to the script, even if it doesn't make any logical sense. That tells us something here too. That's something that everybody probably gleaned from watching him, that he's willing to just stick to whatever he's saying, even if it doesn't make any sense. Who else did you speak with when Mr. Lawley spoke with you? Who else was there? And he says, the witness advocate, I believe. So again, there's a group of people, and he says the witness advocate. This is all truthful. Who else? And then he says, is it Sergeant Tully? Meaning he's not 100% sure of his name, but he's pretty sure it's Sergeant Tully. And then he says again, I believe. And then Tully, T-U-L-L-Y. And he says, I believe so, yes. So the I believe isn't necessarily in reference to the person, Tully, but probably to his name. We see a little bit of uncertainty here, but this looks like a truthful statement to me. Anybody else? He says, not that I remember. So that seems deceptive, or at least that he's not willing to think about it. But this could mean a couple of different things, because if he was sure that there wasn't anyone else there, he would have said no. Anybody else? No. So he doesn't say that. He says, not that I remember. Now, this could be in reference to their name. He might be thinking, I don't remember their name. Maybe there's just a random note taker or someone there. This is not an answer to this question. He says, I don't remember. And it's not that he doesn't remember, it's that he's not willing to explain himself. So he sticks to that short answer and uses, I don't remember. Sergeant Tully taking notes while you were having this conversation with Mr. Lawley. And now Colin says, I do not remember. This is very interesting for us to look at because his answers are short, and that means that every change of language is going to be important. I can't imagine a scenario where a lawyer and an investigator are not going to be taking notes. So this is a clear lie. And he says, I do not remember. When Colin Albert definitively knows that he's lying without having to actually recall anything specific, the sensitivity there uncontracts this denial. So instead of saying, I don't remember, he says, I do not remember. That tells us that when he says, I do not remember, that is a direct lie, that we get an answer from that. It's not that he's not taking the time to remember. It's that he does remember and he's not telling you. So I do not remember. So then Mr. Lawley taking notes, I do not remember. So again, he does. Do you remember being told by either Sergeant Tully or Mr. Lawley that your conversations were being recorded? And he says, I do not remember. Again, I don't know why he's so adamant about this. If there's a reason that he doesn't want to say that it was recorded, but maybe he doesn't want something to be used that he said there. He doesn't want that transcript to be put into evidence. So he might be sensitive about that. Again, I don't really know. That was just speculation. Did they give you any instructions about the preparation for your testimony? How they wanted you to answer questions? And he says, no. Okay, that was direct. So it's either a direct lie or the truth. We can't glean anything from here. Now, how they wanted you to dress, for instance, he says, no. You watched any coverage of this case online? Oh, we just had a question up here that he was watching it on the internet. So we already know the answer to this question. It's yes. And he says, nope, interesting. So now we have an indicator that this change of language from no to nope is meaningful. Nope is his way of lying when this was not a rehearsed question, because this was rehearsed. This no right here. This no right here is part of that same question. So he says no if he's rehearsed it and he's comfortable, he's practiced it. But when he's not comfortable and he hasn't practiced it, he says nope. So the change in language means likely he was seeing coverage on social media. Now, no social media? First question. No, I don't have social media. Okay. So he says no, but then he has to qualify that because the no is a lie. So now he has to mitigate his commitment to that lie. And he says, I don't have social media. He very well might not have social media now. He may have deleted all his social media accounts yesterday. And because of the statement that he gave up here, it's likely that he's going to go into that same rehearsed victim statement. And most likely, they probably all deleted their social media once they started getting bombarded with stuff from the trial from the public. I have no doubt that he doesn't have social media anymore. But this question doesn't say now currently. It says you weren't following it on social media. And he says, no, I don't have social media, meaning that he's lying about following it. We know that because of up here, but he doesn't have social media anymore. And so that gave him an easy way to mitigate that stress. And then no news coverage. He says, no. I think that's probably truthful because he doesn't seem like the type of guy who watches the news. He probably gets literally everything from social media. When the answers are not rehearsed, the no's seem to be truthful. Did they give you any instructions about the preparation for your testimony, how they wanted you to answer questions? He says, no. That's quite possibly true. They might not have said, we want you to answer questions this way. It might have just said, these are the questions that we're going to ask you. I don't think that they necessarily would tell him how to answer questions, which leads me to believe that that's truthful. And so we are seeing a pattern here is what I'm getting at. So literally, according to you, you know zero about the media coverage concerning this case, Commonwealth versus Karen Reed, and he says correct. When he says correct, he's not thinking about his response. He's just agreeing with what Attorney Jackson is saying. When he says correct, he's not really thinking about his response. He listened enough that he doesn't disagree with what he's saying, and he just says correct. Did you talk to Ali before her testimony? Now, he says no. And I put, this question is too vague. Did you talk to Ali before her testimony? That means at any point in her life. When he says no here, it's an obvious lie. I mean, it's not obvious because it's too vague of a question. He's left to interpret this as maybe the night before her testimony, as in, did you prep her or did you guys talk about this the night before she testified? So it allows a very easy no response because he doesn't really know what he's actually saying no to. Okay, when was the last time you did talk to Ali before she testified yesterday? And now he says, I don't remember. He likely doesn't know off the top of his head and isn't willing to think about it. So because of the trial and all the media coverage and everything, it's quite possible that he's going for periods of time, days, maybe a week without talking to her. His initial gut reaction here is, I don't remember. And that's probably true. If he doesn't think about it, he probably doesn't know which day was the last time. He probably knows that it was a few days ago, but he can say, I don't remember, because unless he thinks about it, he's not going to be able to pinpoint the exact time. And so you get a, I don't remember, because he's not willing to think about it. The follow-up question from Attorney Jackson is, give me an idea. She's one of your best friends a week ago, a month ago, and now a week ago, you might have gotten, I don't remember, because it's close and he's not willing to think about it. But when he said a month ago, he knows that they talked sooner than a month ago. And so his I don't remember turns into I do not remember. He uncontracts that denial because now he is aware of the answer. And so we know that he has talked to her. And I wish he wouldn't ask questions like this, but we know that they have talked at least within the last month. Attorney Jackson says, could have been a year ago. And he says, I do not remember. Again, now this, you see a consistency here. It was less than a month ago, so that's also less than a year ago. And you get the same, I do not remember, which means he does know that it was less than that time period, even if he doesn't know the exact day. Then he says 5 years ago, and he says no. So we get another change of language here. He says no. I highlighted that in blue. That shouldn't be blue. That should be probably green, because that's a truthful response. Now you get that simple no. This is not rehearsed, and so that no is truthful. It wasn't longer than 5 years ago. Now that seems obvious. You're probably thinking, why are you even taking a second to look at this? Because we need to make sure that when we are noticing patterns in language, that those patterns are consistent throughout the entire statement. If a pattern that we see is inconsistent even once, and there's no reason for it, then we need to go back and make sure that we're seeing the pattern correctly. So 5 years ago, no, he doesn't want to perjure himself here. He knows that everybody knows, and that it's perfectly fine to say that they've talked within the last 5 years. The murder only happened 2.5 years ago. Clearly, they had talked before that, and now he says no. Okay, so more recently than 5 years ago that you spoke with Ali. And now we go back to I don't remember, because now we go from more recently than 5 years. So now we have this super vague question again, and he's just not willing to pinpoint exactly when they spoke. So you have no independent recollection as you sit here, the last time you talked to one of your best friends and your cousin about any subject. And he says, no. And then he qualifies this no because no is not the right answer. No would not be truthful here. So he can't just say no unless it's well rehearsed. He says no, and then he has to qualify that. I don't remember. And that I don't remember, again, is simply not, he's not willing to pinpoint the time that they talked. It's an issue with...
So you have no independent recollection as you sit here. The last time you talked to one of your best friends and your cousin about any subject.
No, I don't remember.
So nobody ever informed you that you might get nervous on the witness stand, there might be tough questions. The easiest way to get out of that is just say, yeah, I don't recall.
No.
So you just don't recall because your memory is that bad.
It's an issue with your memory, not an instruction that you received. And he says correct. Again, you get that correct, which Attorney Jackson gave him the answer. And so if he gives him the answer and he doesn't have any problem with the answer, he says correct. Right. But you do remember 2.5 years ago, you left 34 Fairview at 12:10 a.m. And he says correct. He says down to the minute. And he says correct because he's just agreeing with him. Yes. Also, he has a text message at the time that he left that he's well aware of. So I don't love this questioning. I'm not a big fan. It allows somebody with Colin Albert's personality to simply, he owns this line of questioning. Let's keep going. Did you two talk about any evidence that you might see, photographs, documents, videos? He says, not that I remember. Now you have not that I remember. This isn't I don't remember. This is not that I remember. And not that I remember means that some of this is true and some of this isn't. They either looked at documents or videos or photographs, but they didn't look at all of them. And the answer that he likes to use when he's lying is a version of I don't remember. So this is not that I remember. And so we are going to actually change that to blue here. Okay. And this was just a month ago in the month. Correct. Could have been more recently than a month. I don't know that. So this stumbling over words, when you repeat I 3 times, that's a lie. That's deception. He knows that it was less than a month ago. Is it pertinent for us that it was less than a month ago? Not really. So who contacted you to come to the DA's office? And he says,
When this meeting a month ago took place.
At the DA's office on Shawmut Road.
Who contacted you to come to the DA's office?
I do not remember that.
Don't remember that either.
No.
Phone call from Mr. Lally, maybe?
I don't believe that I received a phone call. Maybe my lawyer did or my father, but I don't know. I don't believe I did.
So if your father received a phone call and then told you you need to go to the DA's office to meet with Mr. Lally, that would be a conversation with your dad about your preparation for your testimony, correct?
I wouldn't say so, no.
You would categorize that as such?
No.
Okay. Because of course, even though you went to the DA's office to meet Mr. Lally and a sergeant from the Massachusetts State Police to talk about your testimony, you didn't mention that to your dad.
No.
You didn't mention that to your mom.
No.
And when you got done with that meeting, Dad didn't ask you, how'd it go, son?
Nope.
Your mom didn't say, how was that meeting
No.
about this massive murder case?
and he says, I do not remember that. So that's sensitive for him. How he was contacted or who contacted him, that's sensitive for him. Who called your home? Mr. Lawley, maybe? He says, I don't believe. Okay, when he says believe, that was always truthful above. So we can notate this, but when he says I believe, I'm going to tend to believe what he says. And I don't is contracted. He says, I don't believe, not I do not believe. I don't believe that I received a phone call. And then he says, maybe my lawyer did or my father, but I don't know. I don't believe I did. So he repeats this, but he's not stumbling over it. He's re-emphasizing this at the end. What does this tell us? It means that he probably wasn't contacted directly. Then he says, maybe my lawyer did. We haven't seen the word maybe yet. Now, this is highlighted in blue because you find out later that every time he says maybe, that's a lie. He's lying about whatever he says. That becomes a deception tag for him. We tagged this, and that means it wasn't his lawyer. That means that it was his father who was contacted. And he's sensitive about that because he says, I do not remember that. He doesn't want to bring his father into this. And that's why up here, at the very beginning, you didn't speak to your mom, your dad, and he says, nope. Remember when he says nope, he's lying. So he talked to his dad about it. We know this here because of further statements that we see down here, which is his father. So we know that this was his father, that he has talked to his father about his testimony, and that we're seeing deception around that. So if your father received a phone call from Mr. Lawley that you needed to go to the DA's office, that would be a conversation with your dad about the preparation of your testimony. So Attorney Jackson has put these pieces together. He must have known already that ADA Lawley called his father. I'm guessing this must have been to flush that out. And Colin says, I wouldn't say so. Wouldn't is, it's like saying never. Wouldn't is deceptive. When he says, I wouldn't say so, that is deceptive. He does understand this. He does know that his father received that phone call. So interesting, right? Doesn't seem to be earth-shattering information, but we are making sense of this. Okay, because of course, even though you went to the DA's office to meet Mr. Lawley and a sergeant from the Massachusetts State Police to talk about your testimony, you didn't mention that to your dad? And he says, no. We know that this can be a direct lie if it's well rehearsed. He's likely being obstinate here. In the question, it says, you didn't mention that to your dad? And technically, his dad is the one who mentioned it to him. So that's splitting hairs here, but that does reduce the stress a little. But I think that this is due to being rehearsed. This no here is obviously well rehearsed with his father. You didn't mention that to your mom? No. I think this one is probably truthful because it doesn't indicate up here that he talked to his mother about that stuff. So it seems like he's just talking to his father. And when you got done with that meeting, dad didn't ask you, how did it go, son? And he says, no. All right, so that's deceptive. We know that his dad did ask him, and he did talk to his dad about that, a change of language. This is deceptive. And it's common sense. Common sense would tell us that he probably did talk to his dad about that. And so everything is still falling into place, and we're able to verify that nope is a change of language that is pertinent. We just have to be careful with the no's to figure out if those are rehearsed statements or not. So your mom didn't say how was that meeting? And he says no. And that could be rehearsed. but I think most likely that's probably truthful. About this massive murder case, in your mind, this is an important case, correct? Obviously. And he says, correct. Again, he fed him the answer. It's called a leading question. He asked him a leading question and he said, correct. Okay, you were asked to look at a couple of text messages yesterday. He says, yes. So Colin's first day of testimony was the day before by Lolly. So before yesterday, had you ever seen that before? He says, on my phone? Yeah, a truthful statement. Okay, other than on your phone, when you made the screenshot, did you ever seen that before? Mr. Lolly ever show that to you? Not that I remember, no. This is clearly not a truthful statement. Not that I remember is definitely deceptive. You two didn't discuss that in your meeting a month or less ago. And now he says, we could have. I don't remember. This is interesting because he starts out, he's going to say something that is deceptive. And he has trouble with the pronouns and it throws him off. So he says, we, and then he says, could have. And then he says, I don't remember. So clearly here he does remember, but he didn't actually lie about that. It's deception because he says, this part is deception. I don't remember. So let me mark it correctly for you. But he actually says we could have, which is not a denial. I mean, we could have means, yes, he did. Could is different than would. So when you say would, it means it's deceptive. Could have means that it did. He just doesn't want to admit to it. So you two didn't discuss that in your meeting a month or less ago, basically saying that we did, which confirms that this is deception. Actually, let's mark that as deception now that we've confirmed it. Did Mr. Lolly tell you why he wanted to question you about those text messages? I don't remember that. Anytime he adds extra words to I don't remember, it's deception because now he's saying I don't remember that. There's something very specific that he's keying in on that is allowing him to say, I don't remember. We do know why he wanted to question him about those text messages, but that's common sense. Then he switches it up. We finally get away from these leading questions and he says, who's Courtney Proctor? Just move out of the blue. Who's Courtney Proctor? This is where someone like Colin Albert is going to struggle compared to somebody who's extremely educated and very intelligent. This helps us out a lot here because this isn't phrased in a way that he can lie simply about it. Say, I don't remember. So now he has to come up with something. And he says, my. So we got double pronouns, which means this is a sensitive topic for him. She's friendly with my Aunt Jillian. I'm sorry, my Aunt Jillian, she's friendly with. So this is just a jumble, right? And what that tells us, it's not that they're not friendly. They obviously are friendly, but this is something that he's sensitive about. That's what it tells us. That's something we don't want to forget. It's the first opening question, it knocks Colin out of his comfort zone, but this relationship is very sensitive. So that's just a note. We want to make a note of that. But when you say friendly with, describe that. What do you mean by friendly with? And then Colin says, I know that they're pretty friendly. So again, we have a jumble of words here. He repeats pretty friendly. He's still reeling from this question. And it's a simple question. Have you ever been to Courtney Proctor's home? Yes. Okay, that's honest. How many times would you say over the years? He says 4 or 5, maybe. This maybe seems a lot more conclusive than the maybe that we saw up here, that it's deceptive. Calls Mr. Lolly maybe. I don't believe that I received a phone call. Maybe my lawyer did. So 4 or 5, maybe. Maybe in place of I don't know is a qualifier and could be an indicator of deception here. So how many times would you say that you've been there over the years? An honest person should say, I don't know how many times I've been there, 4 or 5. There's no I don't know in here. So the maybe is questionable. When I saw this maybe here, I still had this highlighted in yellow. Her family is close to your family. It's fair to say. Not that close. Close though. So now this is a direct contradiction with itself. This not is repeating of words. That means that what he's about to say is deceptive. So not that close. And then he turns around and he's like, close though. So the sensitivity that we were seeing up here has to do with how close they are. And that's obvious. But what I'm showing you is that if it comes out in the verbiage here and you can actually see it and then you can confirm it. Not that close though. And now he tells the truth about it, which confirms the other stuff that we were looking at here. When you say not that close, but close though, what does that mean? He says, I'd say we were more close when I was younger, not when I got older. That is his first coherent sentence about this topic. And he most likely has just remembered his rehearsed statement about what to say here, because he goes from just babbling to a very coherent sentence. I'd say we were more close when I was younger, not when I got older. So that seems That just feels to me like a very rehearsed statement. And the reason why it feels like that is because of how these statements came out as a jumble. You were the ring bearer in Courtney Proctor's wedding, were you not? Correct. So when you say we're friendly but not that close, you were actually close enough to be a member of her wedding party. Correct. When I was younger. Correct. He says, correct. Remember, when he doesn't disagree with the question, and correct is the easiest way of getting to the next question. Once he says correct, then he wants to go back and correct himself because it's part of that rehearsed statement. When I was younger, we saw this. When I was younger, we saw this up here, literally verbatim, when I was younger. So that indicates to us that this is rehearsed, which the point of that, and I don't think I emphasize this enough, is rehearsed statements are deceptive. They indicate deception. Well, of course it was when you were younger. It was 10 years ago. And he says, yes, yeah. So he realizes that what he said was stupid, but it's part of his rehearsed statement. So he put it in there. And who's Courtney Proctor's brother, Michael Proctor? How long have you known Michael Proctor? Since I was a little kid. You consider the Proctor family close to your family? Yeah. So now he's just going with the flow. Yeah. In your mind, was that a special honor? And he says, I'd say so. Yeah. And when he says, I'd say so, this is his template for how he responds. If he says, I'd say so, it's a truthful statement. If he says, I would say so, that's deception. Because he has a very solid, truthful statement here, any modification to it becomes deception. We saw it was earlier where he said, I would say so. How many times were you interviewed by the Massachusetts State Police in connection with this case? Once. So look, again, a lot of what he says is truthful here. He just comes across like a punk. And that was in July of 2023, correct? I don't remember exactly when. So he qualifies this, which makes this actually technically a truthful statement. I don't remember exactly when. Qualifiers indicate sensitivity around this question. It was about 1.5 years after the event in question. Is that right? And he says around there. When he says around, he means literally not that time. It's around there, yes. So we want to keep in mind that the word around has a very specific meaning for Colin. And here it's unnecessary use of the word around indicates sensitivity surrounding that question. Instead of just saying yes, it was about half a year ago, he says it was around there. Who conducted that interview? Michael Proctor and one of his partners, I believe. So I believe is truthful that it was Michael Proctor and one of his partners. And then he says, I don't remember. That might be in reference to the partner. He may not remember exactly who the partner was or his name. Then Attorney Jackson says, Bill Proctor was the lead investigator, correct? Correct. How long did that interview last? This is where the baseline that we've gotten up to this point, now we're going to start to utilize that. We have been utilizing that already, but this is where it becomes very important. How long did that interview last? I do not remember. I do not remember means I do remember how long it lasted, and I'm not going to tell you. So deception here indicates that we are close to the reason for the sensitivity. Do you remember testifying at one point that it was about 10 minutes? He says no. Confirmation that Colin will lie by saying no. We do know that this was likely rehearsed. So you testified at a different hearing, a different proceeding, one other time, correct? Correct. How long was that interview? The interview that you had with Michael Proctor, that's what that question was about that you just read. And he says, I still don't remember. So huge sensitivity, indicators of deception. So I still don't remember. This is extremely pertinent to him. This is very sensitive. We don't want to forget that. If we're going to go back and interrogate him later, these are the notes that we want to use. This was very sensitive. Whatever happened between him and Michael Proctor in this interview is very sensitive. Did this refresh your recollection? So we go through this whole process there of him looking at his testimony. How long was that interview? How long did that interview last? Did you say 10 minutes? Yes. Okay, so he's just read his own testimony, and now he says yes, which tells us that this is a lie, this is a lie, this is a lie, and so we continue. Was it antagonistic and confrontational? Can you use different words, please? Was he being mean? No. You have known him almost your whole life, right? Yes. He was friendly and cordial, correct? Correct. The interview was comfortable, correct. You didn't feel like you were on the hot seat, no. Okay, so we've just gone through all these questions that he was not treating him like a suspect, is basically what we're getting at here. Did you find that the interview with Michael Proctor was consistent with the relationship that you've had with him over your whole life, meaning that he's always been friendly to you? He was just as friendly in that conversation. Now, that triggered what they rehearsed. So instead of all of these correct, no, I mean, it's basically the same question, but it triggered that rehearsed response. So he's always been friendly to you. My guess is that based on his demeanor and who Colin is, he just forgot that this was part of his rehearsed testimony up here. And then when he got to here, because the question was longer, he realized that that was part of what he had rehearsed. And he says, not really, no, really is an indicator of deception here. How is he different? And then he says, I'd say more professional. So this is rehearsed. Clearly, this is the part that they had been rehearsing that was influencing the stuff above. Colin wants to give the impression that that interview wasn't just pencil whipping the interview. He was told that he has to give the impression that that was a legitimate interview. And so he says, I'd say more professional. Okay, obviously he was doing his job, correct? Correct. He didn't look at your phone. He didn't ask to take your phone. No. That's to seize your phone or seize any other physical items? No. You weren't asked to come down to the police station and sit in an interview room or an interrogation room where you, no. Matter of fact, where'd the conversation take place those 10 minutes? In the DA's office on Shawmut Road. And Trooper Proctor was the one that was sort of leading the conversation, yes. And when it was done, he said, you're free to go, correct. This is 500 questions about the same thing. He didn't take your phone, no. He didn't ask you to look at any text messages, nope. So look at that. Look how specific that is, how we're able to pick that out here. So he clearly did ask him about text messages because he says, nope. Didn't look through your phone? No. I don't think this part's rehearsed. The rehearsed part is this, the way that he conducted himself. But as he's asking about this stuff, about what he did, this all seems truthful, except for the notes. You didn't take any screenshots or videos of your phone or the contents of your phone? And then he says, nope, just let you walk out the door. Correct. This is in reference to Ali now. But she's more than family. She's also a good friend of yours. Correct. Your most convenient way of communicating is through text messages. Correct? Correct. And that's generally how you'd like to communicate with Ali. I'd say so, yeah. So this is his stamp of approval right here. I'd say so, yeah. It's common for you guys to text back and forth. You just texted, hey, you can get me now. Is that right? Yes. And he's just referencing picking him up on the early morning of the 29th. But if you scroll down a bit after the end of that text string that ends at 12:10 a.m. And what date is that? February 20th. That's nearly a month later, correct? Correct. So they didn't text for a month after that. So there was a gap after January 29th when you found out that a man had ended up dead on your uncle's front lawn and you and Ali did not text each other for a month. You were well aware, Mr. Albert, that something very tragic had happened at your uncle's house, right? Correct. You were aware that you had been at your uncle's house that night, right? Correct. You're also aware that according to you, Ali McCabe was the one that picked you up and took you from that location, correct? And after the fact of that tragedy, you and Ali didn't text each other one time for a month, is that right? I don't think that's correct. That's honest. Again, he sounds like a jerk, but this is truthful. I don't think that's correct. So where are those texts? We text on other platforms too. So I'd say other apps. This is information that you'd think that he would conceal, but he's just openly saying that there are other apps that they use. So is there a reason why you decided for the next month just switched platforms to maybe Snapchat? And he says, no reason. That is deception. This type of deception goes back to the process of answering the question. So we want to look at the question again. So is there any reason why you decided for the next month to just switch platforms to Snapchat? Logically, the answer to that would have to be yes. If you have a string of text messages and then all of a sudden there's a month gap, it could be an innocent reason, but there has to be a reason. When he says no reason, that's clearly deceptive. And whenever you get any sort of statement that is a sort of a nonsense statement as an answer to a question, it's deceptive. Here, he has information that he's not going to tell you, and it's not going to look pretty when it comes out. Are you sure that you switched platforms? I'd say so, yeah. Again, that's his most definitely, they did switch platforms. Why did you switch platforms? We go back and forth. So here he said there's no reason. Then now he's starting to answer. We go back and forth, I'd say between platforms, texting. Okay, he didn't answer the question. Why did you switch platforms? We go back and forth. We just don't get any information. This is technically truthful. He says, I'd say, but he didn't answer the question. Do you know that Snapchat has an auto delete function on it? If your app is set to that, yes. So he was ready for this question. He clearly set it to that because he was ready for that question. And over explaining that is an indicator that this is pre-thought out and rehearsed. So he is aware that he's going to be asked questions about Snapchat specifically. And so he had this answer ready to go. Your app was set to that, wasn't it? And he says, I do not remember that. The answer is yes, it was. This is definitive. It was set to that, and he does remember that. All right, the next question. Isn't it true, Mr. Albert, that you either switched platforms or deleted the text because you did not want your text communications with Ali McCabe to be discovered. Is that right? So this is a direct accusation. He has to lie about this. An honest denial here would be, we didn't switch our text communication platform because we didn't want to be discovered. We switched because whatever, because she got an Android phone or whatever. He is answering this. Isn't it true? And he says, that's not true. That is the way to lie that is the least stressful, by just attacking the truth as opposed to attacking and having to say the words be discovered or anything like that in here. So this statement's kind of like this statement, and this is a forceful accusation without a denial. That was my note here. He doesn't say we didn't change it in order to prevent it from being discovered. And this is a forceful accusation, so you should get a forceful denial. Okay, so where are those communications? I do not know. He does know where those communications are. Can't produce them right now, can you? I'm not sure. I'm not sure is another deception tag for him. So hours and days and weeks following the death of John O'Keefe, your communications with your best friend, Ali, the person who gave you a ride home that night, they're just gone, right? And he says, I'm not sure. Okay, so originally I had tagged this yellow. You can't produce them right now. Maybe he could, maybe he couldn't. You know, I'm not sure. That's something you got to see how the context that he uses it in. Now, with this is deception. This I'm not sure is definitely a deception tag for him. But they're just gone, right? I'm not sure. So now we have context for this, and we'll move forward. You testified that you provided a screenshot of your communications on January 29th, 2022 with Ali McCabe. You provided that item as a screenshot, not as an actual text to law enforcement. Is that right? Yes, it is a screenshot. Okay. Well, that gives context to this here. He didn't ask you to look at any text messages, and Colin says nope. So we marked that as a lie. And did you take any screenshots or videos of your phone or the contents of your phone? He says nope. Now we get context to this. So he testified that you provided screenshots of your communications to law enforcement. Is that right? He says yes. It's a screenshot. When you met with Michael Proctor in that interview that lasted 10 minutes, Michael Proctor did not get the actual texts underlying that screenshot, did he? No, we didn't get the actual text. This shows that the nope above was a lie, because he asked him about screenshots and texts, and he said nope. That means those were lies. When we see the nope is different than no, because we saw it there. There's a lot of questions, and he answers no to a lot of them, but the nopes, we are getting definitive confirmation here that they are lies.